We are also selecting for religiosity, for conservatism, for mental health and physical health. And these things are all pleiotripically related. So, for example, religiosity is somewhere in the region of 70% genetic. Conservatism is somewhere in the region of 60% genetic. These things are all associated with mental health and physical health.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Edward Dutton, who's an honorary professor of psychology and has a Substack and YouTube channel called The Jolly Heretic, and I'm excited to dig into a lot of really interesting materials. So welcome.
Hello, welcome. How do you do? Hello.
Quite well, yes. Thank you for joining me from Finland today.
Yes, I've lived in Finland for the last 20 years. I saw the writing on the wall in 2005 that the country had slipped into tyranny. And I thought best to get out at the early stage. Looking back on it now, those were the glory days. Compared to what's happening now, riots, two-tier policing, all kinds of hell. So yeah, I've lived in Finland for 20 years.
What type of authoritarianism are you seeing the UK slip into, or already has?
Well, the state can discriminate against people who are members of a certain political party, and those people are not allowed to be police officers or firemen or school teachers or various other things. That there are tremendous restrictions on freedom of expression, such that a woman who essentially expressed an emotional opinion was jailed for 31 months last summer, infamously. So I don't care if you burned down asylum seeker hotels. She was accused of inciting it, pled guilty in a situation in which the Prime Minister has said you will be put on trial, you will be found guilty, and you will be jailed. So interference with the legal system, clear evidence of two-tier policing, that native European peoples are treated more leniently than those of foreign descent. The extent to which Tony Blair introduced a series of quangos that you have to be left-wing to get into, that farm out parliamentary duties, such that essentially you have a left-wing deep state that tried to subvert Brexit and that had Liz Truss basically removed. I mean, it's an appalling situation.
That is why, I'm here in the U.S. and I talk a lot about how bad wokeness is and cancel culture and things like that. And it seems like the UK is kind of that on steroids. It's like things that we warn about. If things get bad, this could happen. It's already happening in the UK, like jailing people for a social media post.
Yes, indeed. It is one of the very fortunate things about America that you were found is your Second Amendment or your First Amendment, whichever. What is it?
First Amendment.
First Amendment. I'm sorry. First Amendment, free speech. Second Amendment is guns. Both
Yes.
of those things are extremely important because the First Amendment allows you to freely discuss your views on the government, no matter what. Any restrictions on free speech are bound to be abused. The moment you start saying there's things like hate speech, or let's put it from a right-wing perspective, treason speech. Oh, I believe in free speech, but not treason speech. Oh, I believe in free speech, but not blasphemy speech. It's precisely the same thing. Once you have any kind of restrictions on it, short of shouting fire in a crowded theatre and thus causing people to be trampled to death, you are in extremely dangerous territory, because an authoritarian government, and you should always assume there may come one, will be able to abuse those laws to stretch them and stretch them and stretch them and make them quite vague, such that anything it doesn't like by corrupt officials can be placed within the rubric of those laws. And the Second Amendment is important because if you get real tyranny, severe tyranny, then of course that's much less likely to occur, because there's an understanding that the people are armed and will rise up if necessary. Now, I appreciate the flip side of that is you do get things like school massacres, and that's much more so than we would get in the UK. And that's a very serious problem, and that has to be thought about and so on. But there's a definite plus side to the populace being allowed to have guns.
Are you a classical liberal?
I don't think so. I don't really know. Sometimes journalists ask me what I am in a political way. I think I'll just say I'm a 19th century British imperialist. That's
Interesting.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
It seems like when you're talking about the free speech thing, that seems like a fairly rare position to have. A lot of people who are not in power talk about the importance of free speech, and then they get in power and say, well, I want to, suppress your speech. To have that principle be true regardless of who's in power, I don't want to suppress your speech, seems like a rare position to hold.
Rather than put it politically, or talking about it politically, I would say I am first and foremost a researcher, an academic. And I think that that has been dragged into politics because of the way in which academia has become corrupted by political considerations, which is often the case. Academia seems to go through a cycle where it starts off with very intelligent, highly intelligent, autistic people that are obsessed with the truth. And then they come up with amazing innovations. I call it the priestly cycle of universities. They come up with amazing innovations. That means the universities have prestige. That means they're attracted to people of normal range, high intelligence. Normal range, high intelligence is associated with social conformity. It's associated with looking around the world, noticing what the dominant set of values are, having the effortful control to imbibe those values and competitively signal them, and thus attain power and prestige. That's what normal range intelligence does. And then eventually the university therefore inevitably becomes a branch of the church, whether literal or ersatz, and then it kicks out the geniuses, because geniuses are obsessed with truth. They're social irritants. They question the dogmas. They question all dogmas. They offend people. They question dogmas in pursuit of the truth. So they're kicked out of the university. Then the university loses prestige. People stop going to university. The university has to reform. The university brings back the autistics and the highly intelligent people, and it becomes pro free speech. And then we just do it all over again. And we've seen this cycle at least 3 times. So I am in favour of that, and therefore I'm in favour of freedom of unfettered freedom of expression. If you want to be able to understand the nature of things, then if someone says to you, "Oh, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about this, you can't investigate this, this is offensive, this is wrong," what that is screaming at you is that they are not confident in their views, and that they are suppressing something, that they are hiding something, and that is therefore where the truth lies. And that is why I am in favour of freedom of expression. In my more quixotic moments, I would go further and say there should be one restriction on freedom of expression, which is that it should be a crime to advocate restrictions on freedom of expression. But I appreciate that brings in certain ironies.
So you describe yourself as an imperialist, and that's certainly
that's
where
a joke.
I'm at.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm having a bubble with you. I'm not.
Okay.
But yes.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a dirty word where I'm coming from, and you're kind of using it as kind of a playful irony. What do you mean when you joke like that?
Well, I suppose I mean what was the world view of the English 19th century chap in his gentleman's club? And it was broadly that civilization. We know what civilization is. We understand implicitly what it is. And we English are the roof and crown of things in terms of civilization, and I include Americans in that. We are where everything came from: the Industrial Revolution, light bulbs, anything you can think of. Almost anything you can think of has come from the Britannic peoples. We are the most genius people in terms of per capita major innovation since the ancient Greeks that the world has basically ever known. So we should be in charge, and people will probably be happier if we run things. But part of that is tongue in cheek, I suppose. But there is perhaps some truth in it.
That's interesting, because the kind of common social justice woke worldview is kind of the opposite. That because the British were so successful, they should take a back seat now.
Why should they do that?
I think the kind of the theory is that because they were so far ahead, they oppressed these other groups, and you need to let other people get ahead at this point, and kind of.
Why? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you want to send your second 11 into bat rather than your first 11? Why would you say, okay, you've been doing a really good job, everything's going fantastically, now stop doing it and let people that are less competent step in and do it? That seems to be a preposterous thing to do. That's just a recipe for disaster. The situation should be that, and it always was until really relatively recently, when you start to have DEI hiring and promoting for reasons other than merit, that you promote the best people. You promote the best people for the job. And if you don't do that, then you see the consequences. And this has been seen in America very conspicuously. For example, there was a case when was it now? About 2021 in Miami, I think it was, that a block of flats collapsed on a beach in Miami, a block of expensive condominiums, and collapsed, and loads of people were killed. And there was an engineer called Frank Morabito, very intelligent man, very educated man, and he told the people that ran that block of flats that there's water leakage because of what you've done on the roof, and this is going to lead to exponential damage if this is not dealt with. But the people he was communicating with, including presumably the people that were on Miami City Council, weren't intelligent enough to understand what that meant, and weren't intelligent enough to think about the future and act. And accordingly, the building collapsed. This is about 4 years ago. I forget the name of it. It was somewhere in Miami. So that's what happens if you don't promote the best people. You just get chaos. You just get lots of bad decisions. You just get planes falling out of the sky. You just get the insanity of the California wildfires, which were probably in part due to people being hired because of their political views rather than because of their competence.
Yeah, this view of the talent and meritocracy and intelligence, that these things matter and should be prized, why does that go so hard against the mainstream view right now?
I think it can be understood in terms of what we call, we can go to a very, very basic evolutionary level, moral foundations. I don't know if you're familiar with a psychologist called Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah.
And what you find is that he argues that we have 5 moral foundations, and these reflect the fact that on the one hand we are pack animals, so we have to be group oriented, but on the other hand we have to move to the top of the pack in prehistory in order to get women, because in prehistory until very recently we practiced polygamous mating systems, and in order, if you're a woman, in order to get the best men. So you have then these 2 sets of moral foundations, the binding foundations and the individually oriented foundations. The binding foundations, the group-oriented foundations, are obedience to authority, in-group loyalty, and sanctity versus disgust. Often what sanctity does is it sanctifies that which is good for the group and to some extent the individual, and it taboos that which is bad for the group and to some extent the individual. So things like disease or whatever. And then you have the individually oriented foundations, and these are equality and harm avoidance. Equality means you get more of the pie. Harm avoidance means you don't get harmed. So we vary on how important these foundations are to us. And what tends to happen is that conservatives are about the same. I should say the genetic component of these foundations is quite high. It's about 50%. Conservatives are about the same in all 5 moral foundations. Liberals are only interested in the individually oriented foundations. They are not interested in the group-oriented foundations. There are certain nuances to that, but that's essentially the difference. So what this means is that as a rule, things will tend to move leftwards. The conservative can sympathise with the liberal cannot sympathise with the conservative. So the conservative gives ground to the liberal, and things move leftwards and move leftwards and move leftwards until society is insufficiently concerned with group-oriented values. And this causes dysphoria, this causes chaos, basically. This causes chaos, this causes problems. And then you get a right-wing backlash. What often happens is that the individually oriented values, people, intelligent people, as I mentioned earlier, they will imbibe the values, they will competitively signal the values, and so they will control the culture, they will move things leftwards until it comes up against a wall. And that wall is often something like a war. And then you get a backlash. Now, what seems to happen with us probably since the 60s, and particularly since the 90s and the end of the Cold War, is there has been runaway individualism. We're so rich and we're so contented that there's nothing that the extreme runaway individualism can come up against, with the result that it can go on and on and on, competitively signalling, competitively virtue signalling, competitively signalling in favour of equality and harm avoidance. And if you start talking about differences in intelligence, you're talking about differences in ability, you're talking about inequality. And to some extent, you're engaging in harm in so much as stupid people might find it offensive to be told that they're stupid.
So I want to go back a second. I love Jonathan Haidt's moral foundation theory. The Righteous Mind, I think, was written in 2012, I believe. And I feel like it needs somewhat of an updating, I believe, because a lot of left-wing people seem to have adopted those other moral foundations. There seems to be, like in America, there's a disgust response from progressives looking at Trump supporters.
Yes, this is true. So there was a study on this very interesting point. This is what I said about the nuance. So it's moral disgust versus kind of visceral disease disgust. So liberals seem to be high in moral disgust. Why? Well, there's an interesting element to the liberal mind. And that is that conservative people, their moral circle, the people who they identify with, are essentially a series of concentric circles coming out of self. So you love your family more than your kin more than your, I don't know, your general social class, your social class more than your ethnic group more than your race more than your species more than another species, and so on. Liberals don't, again, there's nuances to it, but in general, that's not how liberals work. The liberal moral circle is further from self. So they may, for example, love a different social class more than their own, a different ethnic group more than their own, a different race more than their own, even with some of the animal rights activists, a different species more than their own. So what this means on an everyday level is that they are better able to collaborate, basically to be treasonous, to collaborate with outsiders in order to build up a coalition of people via which they can dominate their own group. So you get this again and again. If you look in history, for example, in Finland, where I come from, the leading people in the Finnish-speaking Finn awakening, because Finland is 5% Swedish speaking, and the aristocracy were Swedes, and the leading people in the Finnish movement in the 19th century were Swedes, were upper class Swedes. And what they had done is they had collaborated with another ethnic group, the Finns, in order to gain power over other upper class Swedes. So there's a sense in which liberals are, at least at the extreme tail, are kind of born traitors. And this means that they will create coalitions of people that are not related to them genetically. And so therefore they will be much more concerned about the morality, because that's how they can be sure that this person is on their side, that they share the same values, the same ideas. And it follows that they will experience intense disgust towards those that don't share their morality, for two reasons. One, that those people are just outsiders, those people are clearly members of a different group, those people are dangerous. Two, those people may be genetically different, and those people may see them as traitors and want to destroy them. So you can see why they would react like that. So that is true. You do have, it is a little bit more nuanced than Haidt says, but overall, I do think it seems to work.
So a second ago, you brought up intelligence, and I have a bachelor's in psychology, and kind of one of the first things you learn, or that you kind of pick up on, not necessarily learn, you pick up on in psychology, is that IQ is probably the most valid and replicated construct in all of psychology, and also for the good of your career, you should probably not talk about it. So tell me about that.
Yeah, this is the case, and there's more and more evidence of its validity all the time. Intelligence differences are very clear. They replicate. They correlate with important things such as socioeconomic status, criminality, negatively, health, genetically and positively. Intelligence is part of a fitness factor of mental health, physical health, and so on, which is strongly genetic and highly heritable. It associates with so many things robustly. It's replicated. There are individual differences in it. These are something in the region of 80% genetic. So there's only a very limited environmental element to it, and that seems to be creating a highly stimulating environment. So you get this phenomenon of some kid of drug addicts or whatever, and they're brought up by middle-class American parents, and this will push their intelligence to its phenotypic maximum. So they'll be very clever until the age of about 18, and then they leave home and they start creating an environment consistent with their own innate intelligence, and rather than what their parents have done, which is push it to their phenotypic maximum. And then, of course, their IQ starts to fall. Which is a very interesting thing that happens. And also, I'm afraid, there are group differences in it. And these differences tend to be the subtests. There are some subtests where the kind of intelligence you're measuring, such as the ability to distinguish between different kinds of shape, is highly environmental. And there are some subtests that are strongly genetic, particularly G, the general factor of personality. and the groups differ on these genetic kinds of tests, and differ consistently. So yeah, it's at the moment, as you were saying earlier, it's highly taboo because we know intelligence is important. We can say it's not important, and there's different kinds of intelligence, and what do you mean by intelligence, and all that decadent nonsense. But when an aeroplane is crashing and both the pilots are dead, who will you want to find to sit there and have them talked how to land the plane? Who will catch on in those circumstances? What do you need? You need a person that is extremely intelligent, and in particular a person that has extremely high spatial intelligence. That's what you need. And in those circumstances, you won't sod about asking what do we mean by intelligence and how are we defining it, and is there emotional intelligence and is there kinesthetic intelligence and all that nonsense. You will say, I need someone who is an engineer. I need someone who's an architect. I need someone who is a doctor. I need someone that has high intelligence, who can be helped to talk down landing that plane if both the pilots are dead.
That's so interesting, and this is what IQ is the one that gets the most pushback in terms of psychological concepts from especially woke people, because it seems like this concept, more than any other, kind of dismantles the idea that hierarchies or differences in economic income distribution, they would say that those are due to oppression, and this would kind of say like it's due to some innate talent or innate ability.
It certainly isn't due to oppression, because if it were due to oppression, then people wouldn't. I was just like, what does that even mean? So, for example, the Native Americans in the United States live in much worse conditions, on average, than the African Americans in the United States, and their norms are much more divorced from American everyday life than are those of African Americans. They are, in a sense, much more oppressed. Yet they do better on IQ tests than the African Americans. Only slightly better, but they do better. So that is inconsistent with this idea that oppression is anything to do with it. If oppression means social class, well, we know across time that there's a study by Gregory Clark, which calculated that from the medieval period right up until the year 2000, the heritability of socioeconomic status in England, based on wills and other documents, was 80%. And that is differentiating between periods of time where there were highly egalitarian policies, where everything was done to lift working class people up into the middle class, after the war, for example, after World War I, and no attempt to do that. And even so, the heritability is about 80%. And this reflects the strong genetic component of it, that intelligence itself is, based on meta-analyses, somewhere in the region of 0.8 heritable. And then secondly, it reflects sexual selection, which is that people tend to assortatively mate. They tend to marry people that are more genetically similar to themselves than the baseline of the population in order to pass on more of their genes. And they assortatively mate in particular on the more genetic, physical and psychological traits. And intelligence is a highly genetic trait, and so couples tend to be relatively similar in terms of intelligence. They assortatively mate for it. So these two factors, the high genetic component of intelligence combined with assortatively mating on intelligence, means that the heritability across time, whether it's in a period where everything is done to help the poor or whether it's where there's nothing done to help the poor, is about the same. So this idea that oppression has anything to do with it, there was an argument. It was called stereotype threat, and the argument was that, it doesn't make any sense, because where do stereotypes come from? What are stereotypes other than pop sociology, other than something that's true, and thus they become stereotypes? But putting that aside, the idea was that if you are stereotyped, if you're part of a group that is stereotyped to do badly in something, then you do badly in it because it makes you stressed somehow. And there were studies, lots of studies. In fact, it just doesn't replicate. It's not true. Sometimes if you prime people with the idea that they're part of a group that is rubbish at, let's say, maths, they somehow do better at it than you'd expect. And there was a huge publication bias where studies that found stereotype threat were published, and studies that didn't weren't published. It's a nonsense stereotype threat. So there's absolutely no evidence that being oppressed. I suppose you could argue being oppressed might reduce intelligence at the environmental level, in so much as if you oppress someone, perhaps you don't give them an intellectually stimulating environment. That's possible, yeah. And then once, let's say you lock them in a room and beat them all the time. They have no access to books. They have no access to intellectual stimulation. It's going to reduce their intelligence. But it's not going to interfere with the genes for intelligence. And one of the things we know, we have national differences in IQ from different countries, and they correlate with national differences in polymorphisms that are associated with IQ at 0.9. So that's almost 1-to-1.
But could you explain like nationality? There's a correlation with nationality.
So we have modal average IQ scores for most countries in the world now, and then they were heavily criticised and whatever for various reasons. My former boss, Richard Lynn, he's now dead, was the main person that calculated them. And so they were criticised for all kinds of cavilling, all kinds of little problems here and there, representative samples, whatever. So then they were completely recalculated to take into account all of these criticisms that were levelled against national IQs. And the new IQs correlated with the old IQs at 0.87, even when we take into account all of these criticisms. And those IQ, we then have from each country, or from many countries, we have genomes, samples, and we have from those genomes, we know there are certain forms of alleles, for example, that are associated with high educational attainment, which correlates with intelligence at 0.7, or indeed just with intelligence. And so they can calculate from that what's called polygenic scores. And what you find is that the national polygenic scores on intelligence correlate with the national average IQ based on administered IQ tests at 0.9. So there's genetic group differences in IQ. And why wouldn't there be? Because intelligence is something that, what is intelligence? It's the ability to solve problems combined with how quickly you solve them. And obviously there are going to be some environments which are more difficult to live in, that require greater cognitive abilities, that require a greater ability to solve problems. And so intelligence will be selected for. If you're in an environment where that's not the case, let's say an unstable, easy ecology where basic needs are met, well, you're going to need to react impulsively with lethal violence at a second's notice. Well, that's negatively correlated with intelligence, behaving like that. So therefore, intelligence becomes selected out. It's a disadvantage.
Like the first thing that comes to my mind is like some correlation between like per capita GDP and like national IQ.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I can find it for you. So this is a book that was written about 2012. It's called Intelligence by Richard Lynn and Taboos Van Lynn. I would imagine that he must have looked at this. National IQs, educational and cognitive attainment, economics. Here we go. So per capita income. So page 69. Luckily, we're not live. You can cut this bit out, and it'll just look like a seamless bit of success.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So per capita income. Hopefully, there's a graph. I think it's about 0.4, 0.3, something like that. I'm just trying to find the graph. Oh yeah, here we go. So it varies according to exactly how you measure it, but GDP per capita 1820 to 1992 correlates with at national IQ of 0.73. GDP per capita 1910 to 1992 0.53. So there's variation in it.
But pretty significant correlation.
Overall, something like 0.5 is the correlation, yeah. So 0.5, 0.6, something of that order, which makes sense because at the individual level, socioeconomic status, socioeconomic status, both achieved and of origin, correlates with intelligence, and somewhere in the region of about 0.4, 0.5. So it would make sense that would be the case. There's going to be nuances to this. One of them is the presence of the nature of the smart fraction. So what is the nature of the distribution? I live in Finland. Finland has the highest average intelligence of any European country. I proved this about 11 years ago in a paper. About 103. It also has the narrowest standard deviation. So the difference between the cleverest Finn and the stupidest Finn is a lot narrower than is the case in Britain or Sweden. Now that's important because it means that although the average IQ is higher, the smart fraction, i.e. the people that are over 130, is lower. And there's studies that indicate that the nature of your smart fraction is actually more important for GDP and whatever than the average IQ of the people. Because the smart fraction of the innovators, the smart fraction come up with the amazing stuff, the smart fraction of the movers and shakers of your nation. So somewhere like India is interesting in that sense. India has an average IQ of 80, so it has 20 points lower than Great Britain. We always compare everything to Great Britain. Great Britain's always 100. But yeah, of course, India is massively genetically diverse, hugely so. And the caste system means that whereas in America you might get some smart, clever lawyer who gets his secretary pregnant and they have a child, right? And the child is equidistant in IQ between the clever lawyer and the reasonably clever secretary. You're not going to get that in India because you've got this very strict caste system where 95% of people marry not just within caste, but within jat, within subcaste. So you end up canalizing the intelligence such that you have a country that has low IQ, but you have a massive range. And you get some super intelligent people. So that's that. And then interestingly, the heritability of intelligence in India is not 0.8 like it is in the West. It's 0.9. Because
why is that?
Because everyone's marrying people that are genetically similar to each other. Remember, a component of the heritability of intelligence is that you're sexually selecting for the genetically similar to you. In India, they're doing that hugely. So then, of course, the genetic component goes up.
Do you think there's a connection in Finland between like ethnic homogeneity, the smaller standard deviation, and a more economically equal society? Is there any connection there?
Yes, I think so. Because intelligence is associated with socioeconomic status. So, and intelligence is highly genetic. So obviously, if you have a very small gene pool, which you have in Finland compared to even England, you have the two average English people are 12th cousins. Two average Finns are 5th cousins. So the genetic diversity in England is enormous. There are more niches to fill. There is more socioeconomic nuance. There are people that are very intelligent and very stupid, and an average IQ of 100. In Finland, everybody's bunched around the mean. Everyone's bunched around their average of 103. So you don't get many geniuses, and also you don't get many criminals or people just living on the street or whatever. But what that means is that as a people, they are not very creative. In terms of per capita Nobel Prizes for science, they have an average IQ of 103. They're at the same level as like Romania, which has an average IQ of 85. They don't innovate original things because they don't have much of a smart fraction. And also the other element to genius is personality. Geniuses tend to have outlier high intelligence combined with basically subclinical psychopathy.
Wow.
Well, yeah, of course, because I mean, what kind of person, if you come up with a new idea, then you are going to offend vested interests. So either you don't care about that, or you're too autistic to understand you're going to offend people. So that implies low agreeableness, low empathy, low altruism, or both. And then also think the idea you've got to sort of, to be a genius, you've got to almost think the unthinkable. For some people, the idea that, let's say, that the world wasn't created by God in 6 days with humans as the pinnacle of civilization is unthinkable. So you've got to have sufficiently low conscientiousness, sufficiently low rule following, The people, normal range people, are successful because they are intelligent and they have high general factor of personality, i.e., high conscientiousness, high agreeableness, low neuroticism, except an optimum level of social anxiety, and reasonably high extroversion, and they have this thing, general factor of personality. That's normal range people. But the super duper successful people, those people are very high in intelligence and moderately low in those pro-social traits, which means they can think outside the box and generate new ideas. It means they're quite mentally unstable, they're quite neurotic, which means they're thinking all the time, they're constantly ruminating, constantly making connections, which allows them to come up with new ideas. It may be that because they experience the world as an unstable, unsafe, dangerous place, they have a strong desire to understand it and make sense of it and control it, which is an element of autism, which is associated with genius, autism. And they're subclinically psychopathic. They don't care about offending people. They don't care about breaking the rules. In fact, they quite like it. They quite enjoy it, I think. They probably quite enjoy it. And so then you get these. I'm just about to publish a book on James Watson, the guy that discovered the structure of DNA. And he's a lovely guy. I've met him, but he doesn't care about offending people. In fact, I think he quite likes it. So that's the other thing Finland doesn't have. It's because it's a very cold, a harsh, stable ecology. Then this selects in favour of what you call a K strategy, i.e., people that live slow, die old. In that kind of ecology, everything slows down. You have to invest energy in nurture, not just sex, or all your offspring will die. You have fewer offspring, fewer wives. You invest more energy in nurture, less energy in sex. You have to be able to cooperate with people to survive. You have to be able to nurture your children. You become pro-social, blah, 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 blah. And Finland reflects that to a very extreme degree. So you don't have many psychopaths. And obviously the flip side of the high IQ psychopath, the genius, is the low IQ psychopath, the criminal. And that's intolerable in a society that's up against it. So that's the other nuance about this. That it's the level of per capita genius, and Britain is very high in per capita genius, and Finland is low in it. Yes.
That's fascinating. Can you tell me about your book? The not the one that's coming out, but the older one.
You mean woke Eugenics, yes. How social justice masks social Darwinism. Okay, well, essentially the idea is this. Essentially it's quite a complicated idea. But we were under harsh Darwinian selection pressure until about 1800 in the Industrial Revolution. This meant that there was child mortality of about 40%. This was purging the population of mutant genes. What we were selecting for was a kind of fitness factor of all of these things that were under selection and thus became pleiotripically related. So we were selecting for intelligence. We know that the rich, from 16th century wills, the richer 50% of the population had double the completed fertility of the poorer 50%. So every generation, the population was being bootstrapped. Those at the bottom of the population die off, and everyone moves one layer down to fill the layer that's been vacated. Essentially, the population was being self-genocided every generation by the upper class. And upper class genes, i.e. more intelligent genes, were moving down the society, and those at the top were getting more intelligence. So we were getting more and more intelligent across time, and this can be seen in per capita innovation going up, in murder rates going down, in literacy going up, in numeracy going up, in interest rates going down, all kinds of factors. We were coming, and just in tracing the genes. We have ancient genomes, we can trace the line of these intelligence polymorphisms. We are becoming more intelligent across time. We are also selecting for religiosity, for conservatism, for mental health and physical health. And these things are all pleiotripically related. So, for example, religiosity is somewhere in the region of 70% genetic. Conservatism is somewhere in the region of 60% genetic. These things are all associated with mental health and physical health. And so we were selecting for all of these things.
Wait, could you say, just to reiterate, conservatism, like political conservatism, is associated with mental and physical health?
Yeah, of course.
That's fascinating.
That's well known. Conservatism is liberalism is associated with pretty much every marker of mutation you can think of. So, mutation is obviously most mutations are bad. Most mutations are an expression of poor health. And so what you find is that conservatism is associated with being mentally healthy. So obviously the brain is a huge target of mutation. It's 84% of the genome. So if you've got an unhealthy body, you're sure as dad have got an unhealthy mind. So the two things go together. So conservatism is associated with being mentally healthy. It's associated with having a more symmetrical face, i.e. a less ugly face. It's associated, if you're a woman, with having a more feminine and beautiful face. If you are a man, it's associated with being physically stronger. It's associated with being physically taller. It's associated with being less sickly as a child. It's associated with, there's so many of them. All of these markers of mutation are associated, it's associated with fertility. All of these markers of mutation are associated with liberalism. And this is because we are under selection, under harsh Darwinian selection. And what happens under harsh Darwinian selection? Well, first of all, you are under selection at the individual level, you are under selection at the group level. How are you more likely to survive at the individual level? You have to be pro-social. Otherwise you get killed. What does religion do? It gives you a little homunculus on your shoulder that tells you to behave yourself. So you're more pro-social. So you're less likely to get cast out by the band and killed. So religion becomes selected for. If you're in the forest and you hear a sound, crunch, is it a twig breaking? Is it a wolf? If you think it's a wolf and it isn't, if you over-detect agency, you've lost nothing. If you under-detect it, you're dead. So obviously we select for people that over-detect agency, i.e. that are more likely to believe in God. Thirdly, you become depressed because you think too much about life. That's no good. You die. You kill yourself. But you believe in God. Then life has meaning. Everything's going to be okay. And also, in times of stress, God hits in and it calms you down and keeps you healthy. So religiousness becomes selected for. It's associated with every marker of an adaptation. It hits in at times of stress. It's strongly genetic. It's associated with fertility. It's associated with mental and physical health. There are certain parts of the brain that if you stimulate them with magnets, it's called the anterior frontal cortex, you become both more religious and more group-oriented. That's the second thing. What else are we selecting for? We know that the group that dominates other groups under harsh Darwinian selection, we know this from computer models, is the one that is high in positive and negative ethnocentrism. That's group-oriented. What does religion do? It takes that which is good for the group and it sanctifies it as the will of God. So the two things become pleiotripically related. So then we're selecting for conservatism. What we said earlier about these moral foundations, what's the difference between liberalism and conservatism? Conservatism is that you are group-oriented. That's the essence of conservatism. That's what it basically is. So obviously under harsh Darwinian conditions, we are selecting for religiosity, we are selecting for conservatism, we are selecting for health, for physical health, and we are selecting for mental health, and therefore those things become bundled together, they become bunched together, pleiotripically related. That's what we're selecting for. Obviously, when the harsh Darwinian selection collapses, when child mortality goes from 50% or 40% as it was in 1800 to 1% today, what you're going to get is a massive build-up in mutation. And in that we were so strongly selecting for conservatism, in what direction will that mutation be? It will be towards atheism, it will be towards liberalism, it will be towards individualism. So you're going to get more and more people like that, and those people are also going to be mentally and physically ill. And that's what the data is telling us is the case. So we have a situation, therefore, where the society becomes more and more and more sick. In addition to that, we were also selecting for intelligence. So intelligence itself was associated with this general fitness factor of conservatism and whatever. For various nuanced reasons it isn't now because of the social conformity associated with intelligence, but it would have been. And so society, and then we get to a point where by about 1900, it's being noticed there is a negative correlation between socioeconomic status and having children. Not positive like it used to be, like it was, positive, double, but negative. So we're getting less intelligent. And we're losing about 1 IQ point per decade. Do you follow? And because we're getting less intelligent, we're getting less healthy, because intelligence is genetically associated with health. So we're becoming stupider, and we're becoming more conservative, and we're becoming more more liberal, and we're becoming less group-oriented, and we're becoming more atheistic, and whatever, just sicker and sicker and sicker. Now, if that goes on for, then worse still what happens, I think, is that at least the society is run along conservative lines. So yes, the society is increasingly mutated and sick, but you're being pushed by society in an adaptive direction. You're being told to believe in God and have children and fight for your country and be good members of the group and all this. But then I suspect a tipping point was reached, probably in about 1963 in America and the UK, where they find in experiments that when 20% of a society, of a group, believe something new, the whole group flips over very quickly. And I think that might have happened in 63. And we flipped from conservatism to liberalism very quickly. And then you get runaway liberalism, runaway individualism, as we were discussing at the beginning of the interview. And then society starts pushing you along a maladaptive roadmap of life. And this is woke eugenics. Because obviously if this went on forever, this process whereby intelligent people have fewer children than less intelligent people, you know, in England, among the native population, as you divide between those where both parents are working, IQ 100, those where one parent's on welfare, IQ 90, those where both parents are on welfare, IQ 85, and those where both parents are on welfare and you have to have social workers and the police involved, the criminal underclass, IQ 80, only that latter group has above replacement fertility. So
wow.
We're becoming stupider and we're becoming more genetically sick and more mentally ill and more physically ill and more reliant on the fruits of civilization, which as we become stupider, we won't be able to sustain because civilization will collapse. I mean, we are losing about 1 IQ point per decade.
Is this a reversing of the Flynn effect?
The Flynn effect is a separate thing. We can go into it if you want. But do you want me to go into it?
Yeah, because I feel like what I learned was like IQ is increasing over the decades.
I knew Jim Flynn, and he agreed with me. Indeed, he endorsed my book, At Our Wits' End, Why We're Becoming Less Intelligent, What It Means for the Future. The Flynn effect does not reflect a rise in intelligence. Intelligence has been going down probably since about 1800, or since a bit later, about 1870. Intelligence, based on many proxies for it, reached a peak in England in about 1870, and it's been going down ever since. And we are now back at where we were in 1600 in terms of various markers for intelligence. So we're much less intelligent than we were in 1870. The Flynn effect was that IQ test scores were going up. The IQ test is not a perfect measurer of intelligence across time. Because what's happening across time is the nature of society is changing, and it's basically forcing you to think in a more scientific way. And this mimics intelligence. So intelligence should be conceived of as a bit like a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, there are various specialized abilities that are very weakly associated with intelligence, like the ability to drive a car or do up your laces or catch a ball or notice similarities between different shapes. Then above that, you have the 3 main kinds of intelligence: verbal, spatial, mathematical. They intercorrelate. So in general, although you get some people that are linguistically tilted and some people that are mentally tilted, in general, people that are good at one are good at all the others. So they intercorrelate. And so then we can factor analyze this down to something called G, general intelligence. That's the pinnacle of intelligence, general intelligence. Now, what was happening was that society was increasingly forcing people to think in a more scientific kind of a fashion. So you could say to somebody in 1920 who could be perfectly intelligent, something like, there are no bears in Austria. Vienna is in Austria. Are there bears in Vienna? That's a perfectly simple, logical proposition for us. Not for them. They'd be like, well, I don't know. Maybe there could be a circus in Vienna one day and there could be a bear there. Right? They just couldn't think like that. But we've been taught to think like that. And so this made us better at some of these specialized abilities at the base of the intelligence pyramid. And these went up so quickly. And remember that the IQ test is an imperfect measurer of intelligence. It's not perfect. that it overwhelmed everything else that was happening. It cloaked everything else that was happening on the IQ test, and it came across as an IQ rise. But it wasn't really an IQ rise. General intelligence was going down. But these subtests are all ranked equally. And that test was going up so massively that it comes across as an IQ rise. Whereas if you look at the more genetically mediated subtests, it's going down. Now, what happened was that those subtests reached their phenotypic maximum in the generation born in about 1980. And what you find after that is a negative Flynn effect. The IQ starts to go down, and it goes down, as it always has been doing, on G, on the most genetically mediated subtests. So the Flynn effect was in a sense, I only say in a sense because there's some evidence that it has positive socioeconomic consequences because it makes you think better in a certain way. In a sense, it was an illusion. And on every other marker, there's numerous of them, we are definitely getting less intelligent. Reaction times have got longer since 1880 and they've been measured in the same way. Colour discrimination has got worse. Per capita innovation has got worse. Backward digit span has got worse. Forward digit span has got worse. Even things like our faces are becoming less symmetrical. Well, having a symmetrical face is associated with intelligence because it's women particularly will sexually select for looks and brain. The two are typically related. Ugly people are generally stupider, and we're becoming uglier. Left-handed people are stupider than right-handed people. We're becoming more left-handed. So on every single measure, we are definitely becoming less intelligent. But we're going off topic a bit. Let me just drag it back to woke eugenics. So you've got this situation where you have this genetically sick population. If next time a Graham Hancock type meteorite hits the Earth, if you have a genetically sick population, we're all dead. And the only people that survive are the people on the Andaman Islands, and they remember us as gods and whatever. Like that. So something has to hit in for this sick population to de-sick itself. And it has. And that is that sick people have taken over the culture, which they began to in 1963. What they then do is push you along a maladaptive roadmap of life, where everything is thrown at you to dissuade you from doing adaptive things, and in essence to dissuade you from passing on your genes. You are told it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be mentally ill, it's okay to change sex. You should feel guilty for being white and not have children. You should feel guilty for being human and not have children. You should, as a man, behave like a woman. You should, as a woman, behave like a man. Everything is being thrown at you to induce you into a death cult. Well, who is going to be resistant to that death cult? The answer is the remnant normal population from pre-industrial times. The people who are genetically religious, genetically conservative, genetically mentally healthy, genetically physically healthy. Those people will be resistant to that death cult, and everybody else will die. And what we find is if you look at it, I looked at this in a book I did with my colleague called The Past is a Future Country, the Coming Conservative Demographic Revolution. If you control for intelligence, so if you just look at the top 15%, 20% of intelligent people, among white people, the big predictor of sterility is that you are liberal and that you are an atheist. Remember, about 60% genetic. And the big predictor of fertility is that you are traditionally religious and that you are conservative. So, of course, this helps to explain why Generation Z is so polarized. Because there is, underneath the hood, as you Americans say, a growing high-intelligence conservative group. And what you will see is the percolation upwards into positions of power of intelligent conservative people and an intelligence backlash, a conservative backlash. But this will happen in a context of decline. I mean, intelligence is going down. I mean, we're getting stupider. I mean, the degree to which our civilization growth is outpaced by our ability to innovate stuff is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Standards of living are relatively speaking going down. But anyway, these people are not sucked into the death cult. That's what wokeness is doing. Wokeness creates this death cult, and if you are even remotely genetically sickly, then you get sucked into it and you don't pass on your genes. But it goes further than that because it operates at a societal level. It's become so dominant in society that people have had enough of it. People have noticed that other people have had enough of it. But yet they are being told, no, you're racist, you're scum, whatever, you're no good. So wokeness does think, what else does it do? Fat acceptance. What's that going to do? Make it acceptable to be fat. People that have got unhealthy genes that are more likely to be fat die. They don't pass on their genes. Euthanasia. What's that going to do? It's going to suck into death people that have got poor genetics or whatever, poor mental health. They don't pass on their genes. Abortion. What does that do? Who has abortions? Women that are genetic psychopaths. That's who. So they are selected out of the gene pool. Woke eugenics, woke policies, woke dominance of society is selecting out the woke and returning the population to genetic health. One nuance to this is what is the intelligence issue. Yes, intelligence is going down, but low intelligence is associated with miscegenation. So if people that have low IQ will tend to drop out of the European group. They will tend to become part of the non-white group. So they are therefore out. And within the European group, then, everything is done to make them feel under attack, to make them as though we're all fundamentalists now. With Christian fundamentalists or evangelicals, and they have this feeling that they're in the world but not of the world, and they have this feeling of being a bit different, and they have this feeling of being a little bit persecuted, and they have this, and it bonds them together and makes them even more firm in their love of God and in their certainty and all this kind of stuff. And that's a bit like what they're doing to conservatives. They're forcing them together, which ironically means that you're probably more likely now, if you're a conservative, to be able to find a conservative girlfriend than was the case 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it was like life was like a pub. And you were in your pub and there were left-wing people and there were right-wing people and there was everything in between and you all rubbed along and you were all friends. And you found someone that was a bit similar to you and you got married to them and you had children. Now life is like a series of gentlemen's clubs where you're only with people that are like you, which elevates the genetic component to these kinds of traits because people are breeding with people that are like them. So what we would expect to happen is these conservatives, and there's already evidence this is starting, they get together, they feel bonded, and they break away into their own separate sub-societies, which is always what happens in the winter of civilization. You always get the breakup of large polities. So, yeah, that's woke eugenics. And what woke eugenics will do is also, by the way, of course, collapse civilization. Because look at what wokeness is doing. Wokeness promotes welfare. What does it do? It pushes down IQ. Clearly. Wokeness promotes feminism. What does it do? Well, the more intelligent women waste their time at university and have hardly any children, and the less intelligent one have loads of kids. So it pushes down IQ. Wokeness promotes sexual degeneracy. So what do you get? Well, the more intelligent people will use contraception, so it pushes down IQ. So wokeness collapses civilization back to harsher conditions, and together with the process of pushing everyone towards woke ideas, it removes wokeness from the gene pool and renders the group healthy once again. So that is woke eugenics.
Wow. Where do you see the population and the culture going because of this 50 years from now?
I think, let's talk about America, because the data I have, A, because I imagine a lot of your viewers are American.
Yes.
You with your snazzy American salmon pink coat. And B, because that's what we had the data on. So the data that I was using was the GSS. It was the American General Social Survey. I suspect what was going to happen is as happens. It happened with Rome. It happened. We are in the winter of civilization. Civilizations go through cycles. At the beginning, in the spring, they're under harsh Darwinian selection pressures. They're under harsh selection for intelligence. They become intelligent. In the summer, they explore and they expand and whatever. In the autumn, that's when they're at their height and they're still self-confident, but they're also highly intelligent and the fruits start to come in. And in the winter, it's always the same. It's always the same. I suspect because intelligence is associated with being highly environmentally sensitive and being able to rise above your instincts. If you think about it, think about those kind of mathematics problems where the instinctive response is this and everyone gets it wrong. And then there's another response that's the correct response. Intelligence means you rise above your instincts. So intelligence means, in a sense, you are less instinctive, you are less hardware and more software. Now, if you place someone in an evolutionary mismatch, then their instincts don't hit in. A good example of this is wanting children. Our evolutionary match is death, is to be surrounded by death all the time. 40% child mortality, whatever. When you prime people with death, or indeed just expose them to death, they want more children. They regard children as less expensive. They desire to have more children. They desire to name the children after themselves to achieve a kind of symbolic immortality. They become more pronatal. If you prime them with luxury and wealth, the opposite happens. So what happens in the winter of civilization is we become so rich that the intelligent cease to desire to have children, putting aside everything else. And they were commenting on that even in ancient Rome. I mean, Augustus imposed a tax on the childless upper class. He noticed it. And they just paid the tax. Various poets comment on it, on the upper classes aren't having children. It's what happens in the winter, because we're so rich that we're so unstressed that the instincts don't hit in. And it's the more intelligent who are less instinctive. So it's their instincts that don't hit in. And then they don't have children. And then the society becomes stupider and stupider and stupider. But other things seem to happen as well because of this. So remember, Darwinian selection has been weakened. What were we selecting for? Conservatism, religiosity, mental health, physical health. So even in Rome, these things start to collapse. It starts to become much more left-wing. You start to get welfare, the dole, whatever. You start to get feminist-type women, mutated women, basically, masculinized women. They're commenting on this at the time. More and more homosexual men. More and more acceptability of homosexuality. Another instinct we have is ethnocentrism. This doesn't hit in. So you get more and more foreign immigration, an embracement of multiculturalism. Absolutely everything we have now you see in the decline of Rome, the decline of Athens, and even the decline of Baghdad. They had female judges and goodness knows what. It's exactly the same. There's a very interesting book by Pasha Glubb on this, John Glubb, called The Fate of Empires. It's the same process. So the strong men have created good times that have created weak men, as it were, and then eventually you get taken over, you get invaded by the people from harsher conditions that come from outside, that are less decadent, i.e. the Germanics, and the process just continues. So that's what's happening. Except with us, it's gone so far and is so extreme, and the level of dysgenics is so enormous that the wokeness has completely taken over the culture, and then we have this woke eugenics reaction. So what would probably happen in the United States is a sorting, and it's already happening. A sorting along political lines and thus along genetic lines, which is that all the conservatives that are living in California are making their way to Florida and Texas. And all the liberals that are in states where they can't get abortions are making their way to states where they can murder their offspring. And so you'll get this great sorting, which is along political lines and genetic lines and racial lines. However, you probably will get some of what I call. So what will happen with the left? The left will just become non-white. That you won't get intelligent left-wing people anymore. I call this the Rayner effect, after our chav redneck Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner. So basically, both conservatives and liberals are getting stupider, but liberals are getting stupider faster among the native population. And so you're going to get fewer and fewer white liberals. Liberalism will be more and more dominated by non-whites and weird mutants, whatever, perverts. And there'll be more of a separation. And what I suspect is that the United States will break up in all but name. So the central government won't any longer have the strength or the ability or the money to be able to hold on to places like Florida or Texas or whatever. They'll just let them do what they like. In the same way that the southern states, until 1964, were kind of permitted to kind of do what they wanted. They were within the Union, but they could have laws that were completely against the Constitution, and nobody interfered, nobody cared. It'll be like that. It'll gradually break up into de facto separate polities. I think that will be the process, and it's probably starting already. Like it's a point now where the left and the right in America are so polarized and hate each other so much that they're probably not going to accept elections anymore. But that won't matter because the states will come apart, I think, organically.
Professor Dutton, I have 2 questions left. The first one about your field of psychology. When I look at psychology, I see it heavily politicized. A lot of the research can't replicate. What are you seeing going on with your field?
Well, I should emphasise that yes, although I have 2 honorary professorships in psychology and I've published lots and lots of psychology journals, I don't actually have a proper qualification in it. I come to it from the outside. I started off in theology, and then from there religious studies, and from there anthropology, and from there into psychology. But you are right. A lot of in about 2010, this replication crisis came to light. And so they've brought in various policies to address p-hacking, to address manipulating the data in order to get statistical significance or whatever. It is heavily politicized. Even the journal Intelligence, which was the bulwark of proper research in psychology, has now basically become taken over by leftists, and that the person that edits it doesn't really have much experience researching intelligence. So, but I think there is. It got to a peak with me where I had a paper forcibly retracted from the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, in which I showed that left-wing people in Finland are more mentally ill on average than right-wing people. And they said I used pejorative language. I just use phrases that are from the psychological literature. It was extraordinary, you know. I basically argued that, and this is true, that leftists are high narcissistic traits. Narcissistic people get narcissistic injury if they're criticised. They got narcissistic injury, and so they had the paper retracted. So it is, even though it got through peer review. And even though I didn't write the stuff in the original draft about narcissistic injury, it was suggested by the reviewers that I put it in. And I put it in, and then the paper was retracted. So it's extraordinary how politicized it is. But I do think there is a movement. We are seeing a movement against woke. I mean, in very subtle, small ways, every day. I'm noticing it, that more and more people have had enough. Once you start telling people that you have to say that a man is a woman and a woman is a man, then the average person's not having that. You've gone too far. You've pushed it too far, and you've pushed people too far, and people are beginning to react. From a woke eugenic point of view, perhaps that's a bad thing. I mean, perhaps we want to engage in accelerationism and really promote wokeness to its most extreme degree. Such that all of the bad genes are purged from the gene pool. But on a personal, everyday level, I am far less concerned about what I say than I was 5 years ago. I think a lot of people feel like that as well.
Wow. So my final question for you is, when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
Dysgenics. Intelligence is declining, and what that is going to eventually lead to. Even if you say, "Oh, AI is going to sort it out," AI is going to sort it out. I don't think it is. I think AI could accelerate woke eugenics. It will create a situation where it'll be like in that film Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, and he can plug himself into this paradise machine. AI will allow people to do that. And that will be a selection event, clearly, for religiosity, for the kind of people that do not want to do that and want to actually have a real life. So I think that, and ultimately, we are going to see the collapse of civilization, and we're seeing it. And we're seeing it because of the negative relationship between intelligence and fertility, particularly among women. And there is a degree to which it's inevitable. And there's a degree to which maybe even it's a good thing that society will always kind of do that. It will always rise and fall. And if it doesn't, then it becomes so deracinated and unhealthy that the collapse is absolute, is death. So there must be something that hits in to stop it rising too high, because if it rises too high, the fall will be too dramatic and there'll be total catastrophe. And so I think it would be good to at least be self-aware, to at least understand what is happening to us. which is that we are becoming less intelligent, and there are going to be consequences to this. And in the 30s, we were prepared to talk about what was happening to us. But since about the 60s, it's become completely taboo to talk about this fact, this thing that is happening, and it's affecting all of us, which is that we are becoming less and less and less intelligent all the time. And our smart fraction is becoming less and less intelligent. I mean, if you lose sort of, 3 or 4 IQ points, you're halving your smart fraction. That has a massive impact. You're halving the number of very clever people that can solve problems. So then society starts to become obsessed with sex and become associated with all of the things that intelligence is negatively associated with. Impulsive, obsessed with sex, not interested in education or reading. I mean, the list is endless, and we're going to see that. So I think we should be aware of what's happening to us. Yeah, that's, I think, a key issue.
Professor Dutton, where can people find you?
So I have a YouTube channel called The Jolly Heretic. So that's where I put a lot of my videos. I have a Substack also called The Jolly Heretic, where I put the more spicy videos that I can't put on YouTube, in-person vlogs, vlogs, interviews, all kinds of interesting stuff. I've interviewed all kinds of interesting people from evangelical pastors to Nick Fuentes. And then I'm on the Twitter at Jolly Heretic, and then you can get my books on Amazon. And my most recent one that might be of interest is Woke Eugenics: How Social Justice is a Mask for Social Darwinism.
So fascinating. Professor Edward Dutton, the Jolly Heretic. I love this conversation. I would talk to you again anytime.
Pleasure. Please do. Please do. Thank you very much.